And how do you see, Annie, COVID, and many of us are now working remotely, how do you see that impacting these issues?
Massively, actually. And I think it's really interesting that on the poll, one of the biggest challenges people have identified is spending time only with their teams. And this is what happens, and this is what happens with LIBOR, is that sometimes, you know, because you're spending too much time with your teams, you can almost get a tribal effect whereby your loyalty to your team can transcend what might be right for the whole organization. I'm not saying that's what people are doing, but that can be a tendency, particularly if you've got a very charismatic leader of that team, can sometimes take you down a path which actually isn't right for the whole organization. But I think more importantly, more broadly, there is an erosion of culture. If we think of culture as being a shared way of thinking, beliefs, values that motivate us to act and behave in a certain way, that becomes eroded because it's not just something that you see written on a wall. It's visceral. It's a sort of like osmosis that we learn about a company culture. We feel it through all our senses. We observe, we take in, we can feel what's right and what's not wrong. Really hard to do when you're just on Zoom calls or working from home. And if culture is the way we do things around here, what happens when they're here? The office is not there anymore. And leadership by walking about, which is what great leaders do, to pick up the pulse of the organization, really get that visceral feeling. Again, you can't do that by zooming about or walking about. So when you've got dispersed employees, some in the office, some working offsite, some at home, things do become much more fragmented, and we lose those kind of like social identities that we get from work. And we get something which I call ethical fading. You know, those grey areas just become a little bit more difficult, more challenging to navigate our way through. If you're in financial services and you're part of the SMR, the senior managers regime, really difficult, because again, you can't see what people are doing on all the time. You're not on every single Zoom call of every member of your team. If you're in the office, you could have picked up someone coming out of a meeting and sitting next to you, and you pick up how they felt about something. You could see maybe if something didn't feel right. Really difficult when we're working remotely. There is more risk taking when we're stressed and anxious, and I think everyone's feeling stressed and anxious at the moment, inevitably. And again, it's like Chris was saying, we get too much of the hormones and the neurotransmitters, which initially are there to help our cognitive functioning be even better, and our long-term memory to help us remember what's similar to this that I can draw upon and learn, you know, what worked then and didn't work. But when we have too much of those hormones and transmitters, our cognitive functioning actually decreases, and our ability to access those long-term memories becomes compromised as well. So that doesn't help. And we also experience something called present bias, where because the future looks so uncertain and ambiguous, we tend to get stuck in focusing on just the here and now. It becomes much harder to do that longer term planning. And in work, we need to do both. We can't just work on the day-to-day problems in front of us. We have to think about the longer term as well. So all of those things get compromised. And I think, again, when people are just finding themselves working more in teams the whole time, again, that ability to be able to speak up, speak out, comes maybe a little bit more difficult. You may feel a bit stupid about sharing something with your peers, or you may not want to ask your line manager. So having tools, for example, like a runway, becomes really important, that allows people to have that ability to be able to make those opinions.